within this conference, people are getting together, looking at the program. People have developed all these wonderful courses and practices and so on that achieve better learning outcomes. But that takes one to the question of, okay, you get together with all these individuals from all these other campuses as you're talking about your wonderful demonstration experiments, but how do you actually make this, instead of these isolated folks, how do you take this to scale? So you don't have to come to meetings like this. Your whole department is talking and using these kind of things, making this the norm, not just a lot of experiments. And so that's really what this is about, is how to taking this to higher scale and how to achieve institutional change. And so what I'm going to talk about is really a large experiment that I ran to do this experiment in institutional change. And it was looking at, really asking the question, can you transform the teaching of entire science departments at large public research universities? And in fact, 2 universities and multiple science departments within those universities, University of British Columbia and University of Colorado. Now, this was a big, extensive project, and writing it up, it turned into a whole book. So, you can go read the book and get a lot more, but I'm just going to give you a few highlights during this talk about that. And the first lesson, real important lesson to take home from this is it showed at least it really is possible that we had, almost entire departments change, and once they'd done it, the faculty liked teaching it better that way, and the students liked it. And so this is just quick data from bunch of the departments we worked with at UBC, which it was science but included math and computer science in that. You can see here that for the most successful departments, it's up around 90% of the faculty, including 90% of the credit hours provided. They've really made major changes in how they were teaching. You can also see that there's substantial variation across departments, and there were a lot of lessons to be learned from that variation. Colorado was a smaller program, but it also had substantial change with order of 100 faculty and 100 courses changed. So now when I talk about these things, usually I have to, spend, in a broader audience, I spend a while trying to explain to people about discipline-based education research and how these practices we know are more effective and so on. But I'm going to assume with this group, I don't need to spend any time on that. You all understand that. But I will, for anybody who doesn't, I'll give you my 5-second summary. You want the learning happens through the thinking that people practice with good feedback, and to design those learning activities properly, these are things researchers are clearly important that have to be factored into this, and these are some important aspects of implementation. And if you haven't gone back and looked at the literature recently, there's a few years I counted over 1,000 publications comparing the sort of research-based teaching with the traditional lecture method. It's a big meta-analysis by Wieman on this, but it shows that across all the STEM disciplines, all the at all levels, there's consistently greater learning. There's lower failure rates with the research-based teaching. And there's less data, but what there is, say, this benefits all students, but it preferentially has some added benefits for the more at-risk by various definitions. Okay, so I don't need to say any more about that. Let me talk about then the work on institutional change, where I'm looking at data like this and deciding, okay, somebody needs to do an experiment to see if you can scale this up. And so I'll talk about the design principles behind the Science Education Initiative model, review sort of its main components and then findings. And then I'm going to talk at the end specifically about a key element that I think is needed, which is changing the incentive system by putting better evaluation of teaching into it, and how I think that can be done. So the central assumption going into the SAI that I had was there really is expertise in teaching. There's different practices, and you know how to use those and use them right, you will get better results than somebody who doesn't. okay? Just like there's expertise in lots of other fields. And the department is the unit of change. It's what determines what and how things are taught at a large university. And then if you want people to make a serious change from what they're doing, you're going to have some kind of incentives for it, both at the unit level and the individual level. And this was a belief I had, but it's been tested now, confirmed from the SEI, is that it really doesn't require any more resources, money, to teach using research-based instruction than it does with the traditional method. But there are some costs of making the transition. And so, I think of this as kind of, you're going to have to invest in, like, you retool the factory so that it can produce a better product, but at the same original cost, okay? And needed to think of all the ways we could minimize the time demands on the faculty while still achieving what we needed. And then there were a bunch of common pitfalls that I saw, that I felt in fact, university teaching faculty development programs, worrying about changing the individuals, but not the culture, the department they were going to go back and work in, avoiding focusing on curriculum rather than the teaching methods and the student outcomes. The investments, the $5,000, $10,000 Teaching Innovation Award, going to expect to make a difference in a department that might have an annual budget of $20 million a year just was unrealistic, and various, other things, okay? So so the core components of the Science Education Initiative were, it was department-centered and used a competitive large grant program. So I had, UBC, where it had really the resources I felt were needed. It was about $10 million, which, and departments could compete for up to $2 million each for something over 6 years, okay? Very different from the usual sorts of program, but if you look at organizational change literature, that's right at the bare minimum. They say organizations that made substantial changes have to invest 5 to 10% of their annual budget for 5 years, and that's so that was guiding that. Then what people did with that money, we didn't require them, but everybody ended up using it in much the same way. Some of it for faculty incentives. The great majority went for hiring these science education specialists who worked in the departments and had expertise in both the discipline and in teaching, and I'll say more about that. And then they worked within the department, working with faculty to transform both the course and the teaching of the faculty in that process. And this particular part, just because it satisfies so many obvious needs and was so successful, a lot of places now have been copying this, albeit often usually smaller scale. They don't have as much money as we do, but the same basic idea is spreading. Now, what we required departments to do to commit to in their proposals was really to transform their courses, and with the faculty teaching along with it, with sort of according to the trinity we had laid out here. First, deciding on learning goals, really articulating for each course they were going to work on very clearly what the students would be able to do in the completion of that course. Oftentimes this would be a few, in a detailed way, maybe a few dozen things actually. And then they had to develop better assessments to probe how well students really were learning those things. And then finally, and the thing that gets the most attention, was add these research-based teaching methods into class to improve the student learning. And so in the list of items, counts of faculty and courses I showed at the beginning, that's really the number of faculty who adopted this and number of courses where it's been done. So jumping through lots of processes and time, summarizing what components of this clearly worked. First, the large competitive grant program, and one of the most obvious ways it worked was before we even gave people a cent, which was that this because this was a substantial thing for a department, in every department actually that was considering competing for this, this generated the first ever, well, in every department, period, when it happened, the first ever department-wide discussion of what they really wanted with their undergraduate education program and what they might do to improve it. What we learned also in this process is in thinking about doing proposals like this is something different than anybody there has really thought about. And so it needed a lot of back and forth discussion and help them develop what was actually need to be in a plan and how this would actually work. It was just to get things that worked well and get the level of detail and commitment that was necessary. We also found it quite important to get a very clear commitment from the department, which involved both from the department chair or head, but also the whole faculty, whole department had to review and vote on this before it could go forward. The second component I mentioned before that was quite successful is this idea of the science education specialists. And so these were people who were expertise in the discipline. Usually they were new PhDs who came to the conclusion they wanted to focus more on teaching in their career than they did on doing disciplinary research. So they all had a very substantial interest in education, but it's really, you can't find, or we couldn't find, people who had substantial expertise in the teaching of it. So we had to develop a fairly formal and extensive training program that we ran centrally to sort of bring these up to speed that they could then go out and work with then they would go into the departments and they'd work collaboratively with typically 1 to 3 faculty members at a time in going through the course transformation and teaching transformation process. What they provide is first, expertise in teaching, but they go to answer Rolf's question much more explicitly of helping Rolf see exactly what kind of activities would probe and develop the kind of thinking he wants to develop in the learners. They provide also, there's a lot of new materials and just work, their expert labor in helping that develop, and they provide quite non-threatening coaching during this process, so they'll be working very closely with a faculty member during this. And they are good for archiving material, and so it gets passed along next to the next instructor who can use and build on it. Just a question that always comes up is, okay, what's the career path for these people? And I was earlier table, and if you're at UC, a whole bunch of these hiring these teaching professors. Let me tell you, they're really strong candidates for teaching professor positions. In fact, they get snatched away often as people are starting to hire to that job. Okay, we had all these science education specialists working, a few dozen actually across these different departments, working with faculty, and we end up developing a lot of resources to support them in different ways. And if you're not familiar with it, we have a website that gives a lot of stuff on it. And this in particular, under the instructor guidance, a lot of 1 or 2 page guides on how to implement very specific, teaching things that people we found the SES needed help with, or things they could give the faculty to use. And particularly important there, I think, is catching, established pitfalls and ways to get into trouble, and so people know about and avoid those. Some of the lessons that learned during this big experiment is first, needed patience and flexibility in terms of who was teaching what and what they were going to do and how they were going to adopt things. Different departments and people were different, and found a very there's a small number of excited early adopters, but the great majority, they needed a couple years actually of being sort of exposed to these ideas and before they were sort of ready to dive in. And it wasn't, as people think, just the young faculty. There's not really much difference between whether they were young or old in this. And We also found, I thought, oh, it makes sense to start out with the bottom courses and transform those and move up. And that was just wrong. It just doesn't work within the constraints. You really need to find what faculty are excited about, eager to do things, work with them, build up this community. They start talking to their colleagues, and you sort of take whatever faculty you can get, and then whatever courses they're going to be teaching, and sort of grow out from there. The seeing data was helpful, but not that helpful. What was really convincing, it might get a little bit of attention, but really what convinced faculty was this idea of hearing, interacting with other faculty members in their department who had made these changes, were excited about it, enthusiastic. And then ultimately the thing that really made the biggest impression was always when these people could go and watch a well-taught active learning class in their department and see basically how much more engaged the students were, they were coming to class, asking lots more questions, and clearly the teaching was just more fun. Also, they could see that all their imagined catastrophes never existed. And I mentioned before, you needed direct incentives to the faculty. You needed bigger ones than I initially expected, but that's because I did not really appreciate how big a barrier to these changes the formal incentive system was. And we just, you have to give people enough money to overcome the penalties that they quite rightly expect are going to come to them. But one key to making these incentives work, we discovered, was it really needed a fairly formal agreement laying out, here's what you're getting, and here's exactly what you're going to deliverables you're going to do, by what timeline, and signed by the faculty member and the department chair. Not because this had any formal, legal significance. It simply made it very clear that this was not just teaching business as usual, and so this really kept it at the top of their priority list when some new call for proposals or a conference comes up, which in their routine teaching always, okay, I'll just slough that off for the next week, okay? And this is really necessary to get things done. And then finally, one I never imagined but turned out to be really important, is the quality of both the departmental structures and the people who work in those structures. And they both matter here. Enormous differences in how effective those are, and it's really critical to have ones that can function well if you want to have innovation and change like this. And it always required new departmental structures. All the existing things, where it was an associate chair for undergraduate studies or a committee for that or something, those are really designed to maintain the quality of the status quo. They really are not designed to make change. And it became clear it was absolutely necessary. You needed something like a teaching innovation committee with a clear responsibility and resources to make change happen to be effective. Okay, so let me switch to the barriers of change that come into this that we saw. And I don't think these are going to be terribly surprising, probably, to many of you. But the first sort of and very fundamental one is the basic concept that there's expertise in teaching. I mean, quite frankly, the predominant view really across the world is in the universities is, if you know the subject well, you know how to teach it, and your effectiveness at that is really something about your personality and can't really be something that's changed. And so recognizing, no, there's real research and expertise in this is the sort of fundamental first step there. But that's then reflected in an incentive system, which just doesn't capture that at all. But, it was just every time you talk to anybody, any faculty member, they perceived, and I think quite correctly, that the incentive system they dealt with was all about research productivity, and anything that would reduce that productivity, for example, the 50 or so hours learning to be a much better teacher, they'd be penalized for. And so this was really if you look more deeply at what's going to be involved in changing that, well, the first problem is they don't we don't really have a reasonable way of evaluating teaching. I mean, every place, and I've found now as I go around the world, pretty much every university in the world, their main method is student course evaluations. And student course evaluations have a number of problems that I'll mention briefly, but in particular for this, it's quite clear evidence that they don't recognize the quality of teaching practices. And faculty are quite concerned that making any change in what students have experienced will result in their teaching evaluations going down. And so the one thing I can just assure you is it may be a perception, but it's not the reality. That we were concerned about this. We looked a little about why this might happen, and basically gave faculty a script to use to how to follow to get student buy-in on this, and it was quite successful. I mean, you can see we now have a few hundred courses, a few hundred faculty that have changed, and we've gone back and looked, and basically these faculty member who goes through and makes this massive change in how they're teaching, often with demonstrably better learning outcomes, their teaching evaluations look just the same before and after, which also tells you something about teaching evaluations, but they don't go down, okay? And we dealt with this, as I said, we just had artificial incentive system that we could use, but that of course takes money. Another big barrier that may not be recognized is the disciplinary cultures. It turns out that certain disciplines, and I'll single out math because it's the most conspicuous there. Math departments all over the world really have certain basic beliefs about teaching and learning that influence their enthusiasm or reluctance to adopt different teaching methods. And so that's the biggest thing in math, and then chemistry has some aspects that we found can be problematic. The others are other disciplines have their own cultures, but they don't get in the way as much as those. Now, those are for the disciplines. Then there's the local culture of the department, and that goes to obvious things about how they value teaching. But even more of a factor in this is their view of ownership of teaching. So how much of the courses and the teaching is really something the department oversees, and how much is the department's job is just to assign it to faculty, and then it's totally owned by the faculty what and how things are taught. And it turns out, within a given institution, that varies wildly from one building to the next in the department. There are a few other ones that you can think about, the tyranny of content and so on, but these were not nearly as serious a problem as these. So let me get back to the evaluation system, because I think ultimately for widespread adoption of these of better teaching methods, there has to be a better way of evaluating teaching, and that involves a lot of issues, and I wrote an article about this that goes in detail. I'll just touch on some of the key things here that I think are required. First, you need something that measures the most learning. It'd be wonderful if you could measure the amount of learning produced in every student and that, but it's just not practical. But you can measure that they're doing things that the instructor leads to the most learning. That's what research can guide you on. It's got to be something that's equally fair and valid for all courses, and that means there can't be a lot of other factors which we know affect student evaluations, like whether it's a big required course or a little elective course, or as some really nice recent studies in physics have come out, it doesn't matter what your gender is, which turns out is about a standard deviation effect in student evaluations. So that you got to have the validity and fairness. It's got to be actionable. You have an evaluation that can tell you what to do to get better, and it's got to be practical to use routinely. Now, if you look at the data on student evaluations, basically, they do this, but they completely fail on those. Okay, and so the better way that I'm pushing for is to take advantage that we know there's expertise. We have research showing there are teaching practices that are more effective. And so we developed this teaching practice inventory, which is a quick, practical way, takes about 10 minutes for a faculty member to fill out, which essentially completely characterizes all the things they do in teaching a course. So that's, part of that's what they do in class, but there's a whole bunch of other things that are important, how they do assessment, what materials they provide, and so on. Captures all of this. And frankly, when I go around and I hear institutions like this that saying, oh, we're really doing great, wonderful things on improving our teaching, and when they can't tell me, as I know they can't, of, okay, so, he's teaching in this course, what teaching methods is he using? And nobody actually looks at that, tracks that. They can't really be serious about improving their teaching. And so this is sort of an essential step of getting a full characterization of what faculty are doing. And then you can look at to what extent are they using, practices that research shows are consistently more effective. So, doing that, we can then get this effective teaching practices score. And this shows you, looking at a bunch of departments at UBC, but now other institutions are using that. They see very much the same kinds of things, which is that it's very discriminating. There's a tremendous range of practices being used. In every department looks at this. This is a shock to them. It's information they never had before. But you see, it's highly discriminating, and it tracks and and documents when there's improvement. For example, one of the departments that made a most serious effort to improve their teaching, this is before and after, and you can see how the histogram of their teaching practices score dramatically changed. So, that's just, I'm putting that out as something that people need to start to thinking, pushing as some better, more meaningful way of evaluating teaching that, and I would argue it needs, like this one does, to at least at some level start capturing what we know about effective teaching is and the expertise in teaching. So I think from a kind of historical perspective, in teaching is kind of like where medicine was in the mid-1870s after a few thousand years of people randomly doing stuff and claiming it, right? They developed science, and then that led to, real scientific medicine and great improvements. We're just reaching that level, I think, in teaching, and so hopefully we can move past the pedagogical equivalent of bloodletting, which I would argue the traditional lecture is. So. To give you a little encouragement, though, it's pretty clear that the national expectations about university teaching really are starting to move and change. I mean, in your own campuses that's happening. But one of the things that I find most compelling is looking at the American Association of Universities. You probably know it's the 60 major research universities. All of yours belong to it, I think. But up until a few years ago, this organization really had nothing to say or felt it was appropriate to be involved in teaching. This, on the other hand, is a recent statement to the members from the president of this organization, which you can probably read faster than I can say it. But basically, from a group like this, a leader of a group like this is an incredibly strong statement saying it's fundamentally irresponsible of these institutions to not be aware of and be using these research-based teaching methods in their courses. So I wanted to, when I finish up here, I want to emphasize that the SEI was not a proof of the right way to do things, or even the best way to do things, the only way to do things. It was a demonstration experiment. And needs to be looked at this. It showed you can make large changes, and it provided a lot of data to guide to see what was important and what wasn't, and how to do that. And there's a lot of alternatives and options one could take. If you don't have those big chunks of money, various incremental steps you can imagine, and people are doing. All of this, you should go read the book and you get much more detail on this. But I just want to throw out that it's unlikely any of you are going to leap up and volunteer in this at sort of a higher level. But if your institution really wants to tackle a large-scale effort like this, many millions of dollars, there's a whole lot of details to get right, and make the offer that Peter Lepage, who's at Cornell and has actually done a very large-scale replication of this at Cornell. We've agreed that if an institution wants to trial this, we'll be happy to work as consultants to work through all these complicated details that we sort of struggle to learn by trial and error. So, I'll just leave you with the main lessons I think you can take away from this, that it really is possible to make large-scale change. But there are some major challenges, and I've already talked about these, the ones I see as the top 3. So hopefully now we can have questions, discussion, and I'll make sure you can see my slides, but the book's really much better. So thank you. Okay. Yeah.
I agree with you completely that the department is the key. I mean, I had the great fortune to be trained.
Yeah. If you give a short question, I can repeat it. But if you're going to have a long discussion, I can't. So.
I think that the problem is that most departments, certainly at public universities, are dysfunctional. Totally dysfunctional. I think that good departments are like good families. And there are very few good families, and I think there's very few. So how do you deal with that?
Okay. So she's claiming that most departments are dysfunctional. I disagree with that. I think most departments are not great at functioning, but they're okay for maintaining the status quo. There are some really dysfunctional departments, and we found out I had to terminate a couple actually because of that. And in the book, I have a list of sort of clear symptoms of a highly dysfunctional department, and then talk about problems that you can have in departments that are workable, okay, and how you deal with them. But what was striking to me was how different there are in departments just, right next door, big variations in how they function. But I think it's not really fair to say they're all highly dysfunctional. They may not do what you want to do, but that doesn't mean they're.
But they don't care about young faculty.
Okay, well, so that's, she's claiming they don't care about young faculty. I know a lot of departments that care a great deal about young faculty, and so, and the deans care about that. So I'd say that's not a fair generalization at all. Yes, in back.
Yeah, so I don't need the microphone, I'll just shout. You have a very optimistic view of things in terms of the possibility of what you started 15 years ago, whatever, and I've done many of the things that you've talked about here. But I find it still so daunting that for most of us, and most UCs, for example, which I'm very familiar with, there's a big gap between, a couple of people doing some things and, but I think you're very realistic. There isn't actually a question here. It's just a sort of you're optimistic. I like that. But I find it like I'm just not going to live long enough to actually see the changes because, $5-10 million. But you hit every point. The incentives, it's the incentives. It's just fundamentally difficult to get research faculty. Lecturers, yes. Research faculty to do what you're talking about.
So you've got to put incentives in place there. And, we found one way to do it is if you can offer a department, $1 to $2 million, they will do it. So, yeah. Yeah. So, and I would say that goes back to the incentive system. As soon as you change the incentives and the hiring and promotion, start looking at some of these issues, then, okay, people are going to change. I mean, what we see the faculty are doing, they're getting exactly what they're getting rewarded for, and if you don't change that reward system, it's not a question of drinking the Kool-Aid. what the cream dish is that they're following. And so, I think if you make that change, you're going to have very rapid change. If you keep rewarding them for not doing this, they're going to do what they are getting rewarded for. So, but that's why I'm pushing this of people need to start doing something like the teaching practice inventory to show there's a better way, a different way to measure teaching in a much more meaningful way. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that, so for this group in particular, we have the opportunity as a system to look at the incentive. The incentives are sort of pretty constant across the UCs. We have an opportunity to look at that and try to figure out how we as a group can result in some degree of change, because I think that is the number one barrier.
Yeah, I mean,
All the other things are important. That is the number one barrier.
yeah, and that I agree absolutely.
Don't even think about
Yeah.
teaching.
Yeah.
You just got to crank it. That's it. And so I think one of the things about this FLC is in getting all the UC campuses together. And I think we're really uniquely poised in some ways in the world because we have 9 campuses. We can think about a way to collectively change the incentive system enough.
But yeah, so but let me say, it's got to be something other than say, oh, you should value teaching more, because that's where it fails. The thing that can encourage you, and I can say because I've actually been, as many of you know, in the last couple of years I've been speaking at a good fraction of the UC campuses, and I talk with faculty, but I also talk with higher up people, and it's very clear nobody's happy with student evaluations, but they don't know any alternative to that. And I think they're getting more and more uncomfortable, first because they're clearly illegal. There's going to be a class action lawsuit over gender discrimination. There's no way in hell a university can win that because the data is so compelling. But also, more immediately is just, and I think it's as more of these go online, the standards of online discourse are a bit different from when students are sitting in class with a faculty member and writing something down. And so they're just getting a lot nastier, and so universities are getting more and more uncomfortable, and they're looking for alternatives. And so I think you should recognize nobody likes them. And so, to the extent you can start advocating for something different and better, and just start at least advocate for using something like the TPI to collect data on, just to inform what people are doing. You can use it for accreditation, sort of a movement in that direction of showing people there's some alternative.
So I was wondering, at the 3 universities you spent most of your time in, has there been any incremental change in incentives that you've observed?
So that unfortunately is a very complicated thing. So at UBC, where we really in the best position to make change, it's a unionized thing. And so anything that involves evaluation actually is a union bargaining thing, and the union doesn't want to have any evaluation. So what we have seen there are some departments that are working to put this into, at least at their department level, they're doing. At Colorado, I don't know what's happening there. Again, it comes down very high level, so it's good. At Stanford, I gotta say, Stanford pays the least attention to teaching of any institution I've ever seen, and they can get away with it, but I'm working on trying to make some progress there, but don't hold your breath. So, yes.
So Carl, you talked a lot about departments as a centerpiece for this.
Yeah.
Departments are this kind of unit that sits between the institution with some loyalty to the institution and a lot to their discipline, right? So to what extent do you think it's important for not just the departments, but a discipline to begin to think about what is the nature of an introductory course and how it's evaluated, and how can we help to execute that?
So I think it's a mistake to get this is just a kind of empirical fact. I'm very uncomfortable about having the discipline think about what should be the nature of the introductory course, because the one discipline I know that does that is chemistry. It has its national accreditation. And their ideas about what should be in the introductory course are hideous, okay? They're sort of every area of chemistry, you know, and this is kind of by committee, wants to make sure their subject's covered so that the 0.1% of students who might end up going into, you know, majoring in their subject gets their stuff. And so that's kind of a hideous direction. On the other hand, to have the discipline and the professional societies in that sort of supporting and advocating this, I'd say physics is the leading in that, and it's clearly making a big difference. You know, it has now a new faculty workshop that's run by the Physics Professional Society that a pretty substantial fraction of new physics faculty members attend, like half, and you know, where it introduces them to a lot of these ideas. They now have talks on physics education research at the regular physics conferences and so on. And I think that, you know, that clearly is having a message, you know, having an impact. It's not because nobody collects data on what teaching methods use. We don't know if that's, you know, influencing, but we do have some surveys that show that the physics faculty are substantially more aware of these than in other disciplines. I think biology is sort of catching up fast in this, and I think that, yeah, so I think that is quite helpful and important to have.
So you mentioned that in both universities where you work on these initiatives, there's large amounts of grant money given to faculty in order, you know, to stimulate their innovation. But what are they being given money
The departments, not the faculty.
Okay, so what is the department being given money for?
So the department is given money to you know, follow the SEI Trinity to go through and transform. I mean, their proposals have to be proposing how they would go ahead and transform some large number of their courses into following this model of detailed learning goals, good, you know, assessments, and teaching methods.
Is the department then using that money for? Like, can they use it to do anything?
So they could use it to do anything they want, but well, you know, so I will say that if you want a program like this, you do need to have some oversight, you know, and that was a lesson we also learned is, okay, you know, they gotta, just like in any grant, they've got to show, you know, progress and reports and milestones on it. But although we didn't specify, you know, what they could use it for, we just had what they do. They all ended up, and I think partly because they saw it work, partly because I talked to them about it, but mostly because once they were faced with, okay, how are we going to actually accomplish this, they realized the two key things were, we got to give some incentives to faculty to make sure they participate, because now we're not talking about the eager early adopters, we're trying to talk to all of them, but most of the money went to hire these science education specialists who then worked with the faculty, supported them in making these transformations. And so the great majority of the money was actually paying for those people, with some of the money paying for incentives, and that's basically how almost all of it was spent. I will say, we put a few requirements on this. One of the requirements I put on was they couldn't do anything which was going to lead to added future costs, you know, so they couldn't use it to make a bunch of smaller classes, for example, because this was by definition a one-time, you know, change grant, and then they were expected to maintain it. So they couldn't do things like, they could do experiments to demonstrate, you know, that adding recitation sections or something was a big improvement, but they couldn't have smaller classes. They couldn't go into transforming, you know, building new classrooms, things like that. Yeah.
So in the absence of $2 million for our department,
Yeah.
are there any grassroots or trickle-up things that we can be doing to try and find the pump potentially?
So the most important thing I would say, you know, when we saw this, how this sort of grows, and what convinces people is you need to get some early adopters, some leaders within the department who take and start using these, transform their classes in these new methods, and get excited and talk about it, make venues where they can be, where they can hear about it, get it onto the, faculty meeting agendas, convince your chair to push for it, and then make opportunities for and encouragement of other faculty to actually come see it. This is a weird thing in our disciplines. It's practically nobody ever goes and sits in on somebody else's class. I mean, maybe in this group they do, but normal faculty member, that's just almost unheard of. Whereas, so you can make it not only heard of, you can announce so-and-so says they'd be happy to have visitors. Here's when they teach. Here's where they teach. Drop in whenever you want. And so just kind of building a few, at least, early adopters and using that to expose it to other people, and the benefits to it would be some things. A lot of people are getting a little bit of money that they can hire like one of these science education specialists within a department. That's a lot cheaper and so on. But ultimately, if you're going to change a whole department, you got to think about the scale of the department that you're going to be working with. It's got to go, and that's just a bigger scale project. It's just not realistic to expect to change big organizations with little tiny fractions of a budget.
Hey, thank you so much.
Okay.